Hello, and welcome to Hanna Wonders, the podcast that dives deep into all our favorite theatrical productions. I am your host, Hanna, and with me in studio today is a very special guest, my favorite sister in the whole world, Kai.
Hey, everyone.
Kai is here today to help me talk about my favorite musical of all time, Jesus Christ Superstar. Kai, are you ready?
Let's do this.
All right, here we go. Jesus Christ Superstar is probably one of the most well-known musicals of all time. Even for non-theater goers, JCS has had such a huge impact on various mediums, it's become a household name over the last 5 decades. What people may not know is that the journey began as a concept album.
I love the original album. Growing up in a family that still listens to vinyl, it's always exciting when we'd break out that beautiful brown and gold cover. The full record was released in 1970 following a successful release in the hit single Superstar.
After the record hit, it topped the U.S. Billboard Top LPs chart in both February and May of 1971 and took the number 1 in the year-end chart, beating out Carole King's massive hit record, Tapestry.
It's crazy to think a musical concept record could sell that well.
I know. It's fair to say the writers didn't think it was going to be that successful either. Jesus Christ Superstar was conceived and written by Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd-Webber. This was actually their third project together, following their shows The Likes of Us and Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat.
Rice and Webber met in 1965 when Rice had given up his plans on becoming a lawyer and was working at EMI Records. They discovered their mutual love for musicals and created a great partnership. Rice wrote the lyrics and Webber the orchestration. Rice once said, "What helps is if two writers are very different. We were very different characters. My more cynical approach and Andrew's more romantic approach was the perfect mix. You don't have to be great friends or in love with each other. It's almost like a marriage." Tim Rice crafted the idea of the show when he developed a fascination with Judas Iscariot. From the beginning, he saw Judas as Jesus' best friend who struggled with his growing fame.
Yes, and that's really what sets this story above the rest. While some audiences may feel it has similar content to Godspell, I think that couldn't be more wrong. JCS is about the final week of Jesus' life from his arrival in Jerusalem to his crucifixion. But even so, the story is really Judas's to tell. It starts with him confronting Jesus with his concerns about his growing superstardom and leads the action through the performance. While we know now that the heads of the church are fans of the show, at the time there was no support for a project like this, hence why they did a concept album first. Upon its full release, I Don't Know How to Love Him, sung by Yvonne Elliman, shot to the top of the charts, and backers were ready to support a Broadway run.
Yeah, but before we jump into the Broadway details, we have to talk about the original casting on that record.
Absolutely.
So first of all, Jesus was played by the one and only Ian Gillan from Deep Purple and Black Sabbath, who, in my opinion, set the bar really high for the vocal quality of that part.
I completely agree. I feel like I've compared every version of that role to his vocal style. It totally matched Webber's unique rock musical sound.
Yeah, totally. And then we have Murray Head as Judas, and most important, to me at least, Yvonne Elliman as Mary Magdalene.
She's been a huge part of the JCS history, and as she was on the concept album, original Broadway cast, and the film.
Gorgeous, talented, just amazing.
Totally agree. It's not hard to see why the concept album went so well. Rice and Webber picked an amazing team to set it up for success. This is something so very Webber, but what I love about the composition on the vinyl is how many instruments he used. Okay, are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
2 flutes, a clarinet, 2 bassoons, 2 saxophones, 6 horns, 4 trumpets, 2 trombones, a drum set, percussion set, 6 guitars, which included 1 acoustic, 2 electric, and 4 bass, 5 pianos, an electric piano, 3 organs, a positive organ, and strings. It's ridiculous. That's he had his own full orchestra for the recording. But before we totally dive into the details about the Broadway productions, I want to make an important note on behalf of Webber. During my research, I found several citations of Webber openly admitting his strong dislike of the original Broadway production, and even more surprisingly, the film.
That's really weird, though. Why?
Because to him, this show was meant for a rock arena. Rice and Webber didn't set out to make another Joseph. They wanted to hit the audience hard and be an organic and honest portrayal of the music. Typically, the show is considered an opera because there's no dialogue. All the action is pushed through song. He actually said that the opening night of JCS on Broadway was, and I quote, "one of the worst nights of my life. I felt sick."
Oh, well, that's a bit much.
No kidding. But he's the man, so I assume he knows what he's talking about. The Broadway production first opened on October 12th, 1971, following all the success of the album. Ben Vereen starred as Judas. Yvonne Elliman was back as Mary, as I said before, and it featured who would turn out to be another Broadway icon, Carl Anderson. Now, Carl didn't open the show, but when Vereen fell ill, Anderson stepped in as the understudy, and even once Vereen was better, they continued taking turns in the role.
Yeah, and that was a big deal because they were both African American, and even the producers were nervous of the backlash. They weren't sure if people would be offended because he's Judas and they had cast a black man to play the so-called antagonist, or if they would be offended because they cast a black man to play a biblical role. Turns out people loved it.
And I do too. Yes, of course, for the diversity casting, because woo, diversity casting. But more than that, their voices were spectacular for the track. And they really took off with what Murray Head had started. They added way more depth and were more creative vocally. It added so much to the role for me. The show opened to mixed reviews, but it ran until June 30th, 1973, and did 711 performances.
Yeah, and the show was nominated for 5 Tony Awards, including Best Score, but didn't win anything. However, Webber won a Drama Desk Award for Most Promising Composer.
Finally, an award show that knows what they're doing. Superstar went on to be a globally performed and recognized show. It's been performed in 20 countries and translated into 18 different languages. Even the 2000 Arrival, starring Glenn Carter and Tony Vincent, received a Tony nom for Best Revival, but alas, didn't take it home. Again, so sad. Most notably, there was a very successful European tour in 2012 that was cast from a TV show. Webber did one of those things like we did in the U.S. I think it was Finding the Next Elle Woods. I think they might have done it for Greece, too. But the cast ended up being Ben Forster as Jesus and my favorite dude, Tim Minchin, as Judas. And
Mel C from Spice Girls as Mary, and she was actually super good.
Oh, Mel C, she did so good. I thought so, too. Because of the direction they took with the production, they kind of used this Occupy movement vibe. It's not post-apocalyptic, but it's very civil unrest, protest based, and it just suit her vocal style so well. Same with Minchin. Funnily enough, that arena tour is Webber's favorite version to date. He loved Minchin as Judas and felt the show actually captured the original intention of the production.
Yeah, okay, but can we get into the original film now? Because that's my favorite.
Mine too. Let's do it.
Okay, so the film adaptation of JCS was released in 1973 and was the 8th highest grossing film of the year. It was directed by Norman Jewison and starred Ted Neeley, Carl Anderson, and Yvonne Elliman.
I met Ted Neeley.
You were 3.
It still counts.
You're not going to move on till you tell the story.
So we were being super cute, and I was 3, and I was at a mall with my parents, and my dad turns around, and I'm, like, playing in the window display of the store they were at, and I'm, like, waving to a stranger, you know, because that's how you do when you're a precocious 3-year-old. So my dad runs over to grab me, and he looks up, and he goes, Lynn, which is my mom. And she comes over, she's like, what? He goes, it's Jesus! Oh my God, it's Jesus! Apparently, Ted Neeley was on the national tour they were doing, and they happened to be in the same city that at the time, and they had no idea. So my dad got to meet Ted Neeley, all because he had a super cute 3-year-old.
I can't believe you just took the time to relive that.
Don't judge me. So back to the film. Norman Jewison had began thinking about a film adaptation before the full album was released. He wanted the movie to be a mix of modern and authentic to the time it took place, so they shot everything on location in Israel. Jewison said that he walked around Israel with his Walkman to get inspired, and that's like where he got that caravan idea. For those of you who haven't seen this film, the opening shot follows a bus of young actors and actresses who get off of a bus in the middle of the desert, grab their props, and begin telling the story. Funny story, like in the commentary on this, Ted Neeley and Norman Jewison are talking about that bus, and it was Ted Neeley's like touring rock and roll bus and was filled with like guitars and stuff, and he had to pull all of that out in order to make room for the actors.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, I think what I love most about this movie is the way they shot these huge wide shots. Jewison spoke about how he used to score to literally choreograph his cinematography. So it's important to remember and mention that there wasn't a real steady cam at the time, so everything that wasn't on a huge crane was filmed by hand. It was handheld.
I also admire the costume decisions. Like for the soldiers, they wore military boots, camo pants, and then put all the Romans in Roman purple tank tops and chrome helmets.
They were shiny.
They were so shiny. But it looked cool in the desert landscape. It was like, it really popped.
Yeah, and another fun fact is that the initial cave scene where Judas and Jesus have their first confrontation are called the Caves of Beit Guvrin.
I know it's hard to say. Is it Beit Guvrin?
Beit Guvrin?
Anyways, it's a real place.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. And they're in the real thing. So back in biblical times, these caves were used to hold prisoners, which is
it's pretty
cool.
messed up.
Yeah,
but yeah, they use all of these like original places for their shots. It's super cool. The whole film was pretty authentic because of the sites that they chose. It was supposedly 120 degrees on average during filming, and so dry that the Israeli army told the production crew that everyone needed to be drinking a minimum of 3 liters of water per day. Everything was limited for the cast and crew because of their location. They lived very modestly in a small hotel and packed up everything to take to site every morning. This meant that for that famous temple scene when Jesus gets angry and starts like flipping tables at the market, they only had 2 takes to get the shots they needed because they were limited on the props that they could get to the site. My favorite thing is Jewison talking about how Ted Neeley was so in the moment and went so hard on the props. He was terrified that like a piece of glass or pottery was going to just shred Neeley's face.
Yeah, but my favorite thing ever is what you told me about the stereo speakers.
Oh, yeah, the stereo. Okay, so since this is a musical, all the songs were pre-recorded and the actors lip-synced to their recording when they're filming. Well, the reason that Neeley was so freaking good at it was because he had huge A7 speakers on either side of the camera turned to 11 so that he could stay in the moment and get every movement to line up with his recording.
Didn't you say that they did that even during the Gethsemane scene when he's walking up that cliffside?
Yes. And none of the crew members had any harnesses on.
And no one fell? That's a miracle.
Well, not in that scene, but during the superstar number in the amphitheater, Rob Oskov was working behind Jewison during a shot, and they were at the top of the amphitheater, again, with no harness, and Rob fell 30 to 40 feet, barely missing the heavy machinery on set. He was hospitalized with a broken jaw, pelvis, and shoulder.
Well, that's horrifying.
Yeah, no kidding.
Okay, so the film came out to mixed reviews, right? And even Webber wasn't a fan. He just wanted Jesus to be more masculine than the way Neeley portrayed him.
Yes.
Okay, so are we going to talk about JCS Live?
No.
Are you...
Nope. I have said my piece, and I am washing my hands of it.
That great, huh?
I actually had mixed feelings, but I still like to think it didn't happen.
That's fair.
I do want to chat briefly about the backlash the show received.
Yeah, many religious groups thought it was sacrilegious to show Jesus with such humanity. Judas as well.
And like Godspell, people didn't like that the resurrection wasn't depicted at the end.
But that wasn't the point. The reason heathens like you and I enjoy the story so much is because it's about the people.
Right.
Yeah, like the relationships and love between the biblical characters that we all think we know.
Absolutely.
The Vatican ended up loving it, though.
They totally did. They ended up endorsing the film, completely loved it. In fact, I believe they told Jewison that they hadn't been that impressed since Da Vinci.
Oh my gosh.
Anywho, before we say goodbye to this episode and Jesus Christ Superstar, I would love to ask you a few questions about yourself and make you feel awkward.
Yep, hit me.
I know that theater and dance had a pretty big impact on your life when you were young. So could you tell our listeners a bit about that?
Sure. Okay, so saying that I'm awkward is an understatement. But if you think it's bad now, you should have seen me before I got into theater. Okay, so my first intro to theater was doing Fiddler on the Roof at our local community theater. And I remember being so horrified at the idea of going. But once I got there, I realized that it wasn't that bad. And it was really cool to experience being somebody else. So fast forward to middle and high school, and I started acting on my own with my classes. And I really found a great community of people. I may not have gone into theater as my career, but it's a huge reason that I was able to break out and like be more comfortable being myself and with other people. Yeah.
I remember when you were in the play Holes, based on the book by Louis Sacker, and you had your first onstage kiss. You were kissing Kate. I couldn't believe that my painfully shy baby sister was up there confident as all hell. It was such an amazing thing to witness.
Well, thanks.
No, thank you. This has been so much fun to have you on here. And I know we both wanted to do a very special shout out to our parents, Rob and Lynn, on this episode. While theater wasn't in their career paths, they certainly infused our lives with it.
Nothing better than having a family that does the dishes while singing all the parts in Phantom, Oliver, and JCS.
Totally. So thank you very much to them for their support and kickstarting this passion of ours. But thank you so much to the listeners of Hanna Wonders, the podcast about the wonderful world of theater. I'm so thankful to have this platform to tell you all about the nerdy, amazing things that are happening or have happened in the theatrical world. I'll see you guys next time.
See ya.